Some journeys don't take you where you expect. They take you where you're needed most. When Rosalie Quinn stepped off the train that day, she thought she was meeting the man who had written her dreams onto paper. Instead, she found a stranger and a truth she never could have imagined. Settle in for a story of betrayal, resilience, and an unexpected kind of love on the unforgiving plains of the Wild West. Rosalie Quinn stepped off the train with the kind of calm that only comes after 1,000 storms. Her gloved hand gripped the leather handle of a modest suitcase, everything she owned in the world. Behind her, the last whistle of the Wyoming and Pacific Railway echoed against the open hills like a door slamming shut. She expected to see a man holding a small sign. Nate James, he had signed all his letters. Tall, quiet, a farmer with a poet's heart. At least that's how he sounded when he wrote. But the man waiting by the platform wasn't him. He wore a tan duster, dusty boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face. Still, Rosalie knew instantly he was not the man who'd signed those letters. He approached with a slow, almost hesitant gait. "Miss Quinn?" he asked, voice low and rough as riverstone. "Yes," she said cautiously, her Boston accent still crisp under the dust of travel. "And you are?" He took off his hat. Chestnut hair, tired blue eyes. He looked younger than she expected, maybe 30, but weathered. "Calder James. I'm Nate's brother." Rosalie blinked, momentarily stunned. I thought Nathaniel would be meeting me himself." Calder shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the edge of town like he hoped to be anywhere but here. "Things changed," he said after a pause. "He couldn't make it. I came in his place." The train hissed and lurched behind her, pulling away. She turned instinctively toward it, though she had no intention of getting back on. She had sold everything for this journey. There was no return ticket. Rosalie straightened her spine. "Is he well?" Calder's jaw tightened. "We can talk on the way to the ranch. It's not far." There was something missing in his tone, something not said, but Rosalie, exhausted and windblown, nodded. Whatever answers there were, they'd come in time. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking as it wound through dusty roads flanked by hills turning gold in the late sun. Calder sat beside her, reins in hand, but barely looked her way. Rosalie stole glances at him when she thought he wouldn't notice. He didn't look much like the man in her imagination. Nate's letters had painted vivid images: morning dew on hay bales, sweet tea on the porch, the wind singing through pines. Calder looked like a man who hadn't heard music in a long while. She cleared her throat. "I'm sorry if this is awkward. I know we weren't meant to meet like this." Calder gave a soft grunt, as if that explained everything. Rosalie tried again. "He told me he lived alone on the ranch. No mention of a brother." "I've only been back a few months," Calder said flatly. "After the war, I drifted. Didn't plan to stay. Still might not. Maybe Nate wrote those letters because he thought finding someone like you could fix the parts of him that were already breaking. And Nathaniel." He glanced at her then, just for a second, but it was enough. His eyes held something close to sorrow, but edged with something colder. "Guilt? Regret?" "He's not around anymore," Calder muttered. Rosalie's breath caught. "Do you mean—" "No." Calder snapped the reins lightly, jaw working. "I mean he left. Without a word." The weight of the words settled between them like a sack of flour. Rosalie's pulse thudded in her ears. "Gone? After all the letters? After the promises?" "He knew I was coming," she said quietly. "He asked me to." "I know," Calder said, "and that's why I came." They rode the rest of the way in silence. The ranch house came into view near dusk. It wasn't large, but it stood firm against the wind, windows aglow with late light. A dog barked from the porch, tail wagging as they pulled up. Calder helped her down from the wagon, his hand rough but steady. She noticed the scar across his knuckles, the stiffness in how he moved, like pain was something he'd gotten used to ignoring. "I'll show you the room Nate had fixed up," he said. "It's yours if you still want it." She hesitated, suitcase in hand. "And what exactly am I to you now, Mr. James?" He looked at her then, not like a man sizing up a bride, but like someone staring into a storm, unsure if it'd pass or break the land in half. "I don't know," he said, "but I figured letting you show up to no one at all." That'd be worse. Rosalie nodded slowly. She had crossed a continent for a man who'd disappeared and found his brother waiting in his place. Her journey was supposed to be over, but somehow it had only just begun. The guest room smelled faintly of cedar and coal smoke. Rosalie stood by the window, brushing the dust from her dress sleeves as the last of the sun bled out behind the hills. Outside, Calder was stabling the horse, movement slow but sure, as if he'd done it 1,000 times but never learned to enjoy it. The room was clean, though plainly furnished. Bed, basin, wooden dresser, and a small table. A kerosene lampa vilamlat yongen, a semeldokun. Sitting down on the edge of the bed, Rosalie drew out the bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Each one was signed with care. Yours in hope, Nate. She untied the ribbon, fingers trembling, and unfolded the first letter. I imagine you with eyes full of questions and a heart steadier than mine. Life here is quiet, but I dream of a softer voice to fill the silence. Rosalie frowned. Something about the words felt too polished, too careful, as if they had been crafted for a stranger, not whispered from the heart. She read it aloud softly, then paused. In the dim light, with the wind whispering against the glass, the words didn't sound quite right. Or rather, they didn't sound like him. Calder. And yet, the phrasing, the cadence, something felt off. Not just about Nate, about the letters themselves. The next morning, Calder was already outside chopping wood when Rosalie stepped onto the porch. She watched him for a moment. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, arms tense with each strike. He didn't look up. I read some of the letters again last night, she said, stepping down onto the dusty path. Did you? He muttered, not breaking rhythm. They were beautiful, she offered, cautious. But not really the kind of things a man writes without meaning them. The axe split another log with a crack. Calder set the pieces aside. Do you know what he said in the last one? She pressed. Calder finally looked up, squinting against the sun. Number I don't. Rosalie reached into her coat pocket and pulled it out. I can't wait to see the green in your eyes when you step off that train. I'll be the one in the brown hat, holding sunflowers. She waited. Calder said nothing. I saw no sunflowers, she said gently, and I've got blue eyes, not green. Calder exhaled through his nose, set the axe down, and wiped his hands on a rag. I never read the letters. Didn't know he'd sent so many. Rosalie frowned. But you knew my name. Only from the envelope I found after he was gone. Rosalie's voice dropped. Gone how? Calder glanced toward the barn, then back. One day he rode out, said he was going to Jackson to trade for supplies. Never came back. She swallowed hard. And you didn't go after him? I did. For a week. Traced his trail until it just vanished near Snake Ridge. No sign of him. Not alive. Not dead. Just gone. After he vanished, it was like a silence settled over the town, a heavy kind of knowing that no one dared to speak out loud. Rosalie stood frozen. Why didn't you tell me yesterday? Calder looked away. You came so far. I figured I could at least give you a place to land. Later that day, Rosalie walked alone into town. The streets of Dry Creek were quiet for a Thursday. One saloon, a sheriff's office, 2 mercantiles, and a church. The wooden sidewalk creaked beneath her boots, every step sounding louder than it should in the wary hush of the town. She passed an old woman sweeping her stoop who gave her a long look, then went back to work. Strangers were news out here, especially dressed in Eastern lace. She entered the general store, bell jingling softly. The clerk, a man with salt and pepper hair and a paunch over his belt, looked up with a start. You must be the James boy's bride, he said flatly. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. I'm Rosalie Quinn. He nodded, chewing a toothpick. Name made the rounds. Folks were wondering if you'd really show. Why? The clerk leaned on the counter. 'Cause Nate James was seen heading out of town 3 weeks back, arguing with Sheriff Merrick on his way out. Next thing we know, he's gone and Calder's back in town, suddenly running the ranch again. Rosalie's stomach twisted. What did they argue about? Money, land, I don't rightly know. But Merrick's got his fingers in every deal around here. And Nate? He was starting to make noise. Back at the ranch, Calder was fixing a fence post when Rosalie returned. "Why didn't you tell me Nate and the sheriff were at odds?" she asked sharply. Calder stiffened. "Because it doesn't matter now." "It does to me," she said, stepping closer. "Did you even believe he was coming back?" "No," Calder said, voice low. "But I hoped." They stood there in the wind, neither backing down. "Did you ever read the letters I wrote to him?" she asked. "No," Calder said. "Didn't feel right. They were yours." "His." She held his gaze. "Well, I think someone else did." The sun dipped low behind Dry Creek's brittle hills as Rosalie and Calder sat on opposite sides of the worn kitchen table. Between them, an untouched pot of coffee cooled. The room smelled faintly of iron and dust, the scent of a ranch holding its breath. Calder raked a hand through his hair, eyes shadowed. "You think Merrick had something to do with Nate disappearing?" Rosalie didn't flinch. "I think there's too much no one's saying." Calder leaned back in his chair, its wooden legs creaking under him. "That's how Dry Creek works. Folks keep their heads down. They survive." Rosalie's fingers tightened around the mug in front of her. "I didn't come all this way to survive. I came to live." The words hung there, daring him to answer. Calder looked away first. The next morning, Rosalie returned to town alone. She hadn't told Calder she was going. He would have tried to stop her, and she needed to see for herself. The sheriff's office stood squat and mean at the end of Main Street. A single star-shaped badge gleamed on the door. Rosalie hesitated only a moment before pushing inside. Sheriff Merrick Cole sat behind the desk, boots up, hat tipped low over his face. He looked up slowly as she entered, gray eyes sharp under the brim. "Well now, if it isn't the James bride." Rosalie straightened. "I'm Rosalie Quinn." He chuckled, low and dry. "Might be, but around here, you're Nate's little ghost." The words hit harder than she expected. "I'm looking for information," she said steadily. Merrick dropped his boots to the floor and leaned forward, arms on the desk. "You and half the town. Nate James left debts and promises in every saloon and mercantile from here to Cheyenne." "He wrote to me," Rosalie said. "He asked me to come here." The sheriff's grin didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe he meant it when he wrote it. Maybe he didn't. Men change their minds when trouble's on their heels." "What kind of trouble?" Merrick shrugged, but his hands tensed. "Land disputes, loans. Nate wasn't the only one getting squeezed when cattle prices dropped." Rosalie tilted her head. "Squeezed by who?" "You ask too many questions for a lady who ain't got a man standing behind her," Merrick said, voice hardening. Rosalie stepped closer, hands at her sides but voice clear. "I stand behind myself, Sheriff. I always have." They stared at each other across the room. Two stubborn forces, neither willing to blink first. Finally, Merrick leaned back, smile thin. "Best advice? Let dead men lie." Rosalie left without another word. Back at the ranch, Calder was shoeing a horse when she arrived, sweat darkening the back of his shirt. He looked up, grimacing. "You went to Merrick." "I did," she said, tossing her shawl onto a porch rail. His shoulders sagged. "I should have warned you. He don't take kindly to poking." "I don't take kindly to being lied to," she snapped. Calder wiped his hands on a rag, moving slowly toward her. "You think I'm lying?" Rosalie swallowed, struggling to calm the fire inside her. "I think you're not telling me everything." He stopped a few paces away. "You're right." The air between them crackled, raw and waiting. Calder looked past her, toward the empty horizon. Nate didn't just leave debts behind, he left a mess. He started digging into land records, trying to prove Merrick and a few others were cheating settlers out of property. He was getting close. Rosalie's chest tightened. And then he vanished. Calder nodded grimly. "I think Merrick made sure of it." Rosalie's throat burned. "And you stayed silent." "What good would it do, Rosie?" he asked, voice rough. "Merrick owns the law here. One word against him, and you end up missing too." She flinched at the nickname, Rosie, as if he had no right to something so soft, not yet. That night, Rosalie sat outside under a sky heavy with stars. The prairie stretched out in every direction, vast and unknowable. She hugged her knees to her chest, heart hammering against her ribs. Nate was gone. The man she had crossed an entire country for might have never truly been hers. And the man who stood beside her now, Calder, was a stranger in a familiar shape. Yet when Calder stepped onto the porch, mug of coffee in hand, and set it beside her without a word, something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but a crack, a beginning. "I'm sorry," Calder said quietly, "for all of it." Rosalie didn't answer. She just wrapped her hands around the warm mug and stared into the endless night. In Dry Creek, nothing was as it seemed, and tomorrow she would find out just how deep the rot went. The wind kicked up before dawn, rattling the shutters and moaning low across the plains like some old ghost. Rosalie stood at the window, watching clouds build like bruises over the far hills. A storm was coming, real and otherwise. Behind her, Calder was gathering supplies: extra blankets, oil for the lamps, ropes to tie down the shutters. He moved with the weary precision of someone who had weathered too many tempests to panic now. "You ever seen one like this?" she asked, voice soft. He shook his head. "Not this time of year, it's wrong." Wrong. Just like everything else in Dry Creek. By noon, the storm hit. The first wall of dust slammed into the house like a living thing, shrieking through every crack. Rosalie and Calder moved together, slamming shutters, bracing the front door with whatever furniture they could drag. Dust seeped through the cracks in the walls, carrying the sharp, dry scent of the plains straight into the house. The house creaked and groaned under the assault, and for a while it felt like the wind might tear them right off the earth. In the kitchen, they huddled by the stove, the single lamp casting long, shaky shadows across the walls. Calder sat on the floor, legs stretched out, back against the cupboard. Rosalie paced, unable to sit still, every nerve jangling. "Storms strip everything down," Calder said after a long silence. "All the pretty things, all the lies." Rosalie turned toward him. "Is that what this is? A reckoning?" He gave a humorless chuckle. "Could be." Hours passed. The storm howled on. Rosalie finally slumped against the opposite wall, hands wrapped around her knees. Her hair was coming undone, tendrils clinging to her damp face. Across from her, Calder watched her with something close to pain in his eyes. "You ever wonder why Nate wrote you?" he asked suddenly. She blinked. "What do you mean?" Calder shifted, boots scraping against the worn wood floor. He wasn't the kind of man to settle down. Always had one eye on the horizon, even before things got bad. Rosalie's chest tightened. "He said he wanted a home, a family." "He might have wanted it," Calder said, "but he didn't know how to have it." Rosalie looked down at her hands. "And you?" Calder smiled, but it was a tired thing. "I stopped wanting much of anything a long time ago." Outside, the wind screamed louder, shaking the walls. Rosalie closed her eyes, the sound of it pressing against her chest, against all the places inside her that still ached for answers. "I thought I was coming to marry a man who loved me," she whispered. "But maybe I was just running from what I left behind." Calder's voice was low. "What did you leave?" Rosalie hesitated. In Boston, she had been a ghost. After the fever took her family, after the debt stripped away her home, no one needed a woman with no name left worth mentioning. "A life that forgot about me," she said finally. They sat there, two people scraped raw by different storms, listening to the house breathe and shift around them. Near midnight, the storm began to ease. The shrieking died down to a low moan, then finally silence. Calder stood first, moving stiffly toward the front door. He tested it cautiously, pushing against it until it creaked open an inch. Dust poured inside like smoke. "Fence will be down," he said grimly. "Maybe the barn roof too." He grabbed his coat and hat, pulling them on with quick, practiced movements. Rosalie rose too. "I'll come." Calder opened his mouth to protest, but something in her eyes made him think better of it. Side by side, they stepped out into the wreckage. The ranch looked like it had been clawed by a giant hand. Fences torn from the earth, pieces of the barn roof hanging at crazy angles, tools scattered like forgotten toys. Together they moved through it, righting what they could, salvaging what wasn't lost. At one point, Calder reached to lift a fallen beam, his muscles straining. Without hesitation, Rosalie rushed to his side, bracing it with all her strength. Their eyes met over the cracked wood, An understanding passed between them, wordless and solid. This land didn't yield easily. Neither would they. Hours later, just as the first streaks of pale dawn colored the sky, they returned to the porch. Dust clung to their skin, their clothes, even their eyelashes. Rosalie sank onto the top step, breathing hard. Calder dropped beside her, stretching his long legs out across the boards. For a long while, they said nothing, just sat there, watching the horizon rebuild itself. Finally, Calder spoke. "You didn't have to stay." Rosalie looked at him, tired but certain. "Neither did you." A flicker of something, respect, maybe more, passed across Calder's face. The storm had stripped away the easy lies, just as he said it would. What remained between them wasn't simple, but it was real. The day after the storm, the sky was so clear it felt unnatural, like the land was pretending nothing had happened. But Rosalie knew better. Storms didn't just vanish, they left things broken behind. Calder had ridden out early to check the far pasture, leaving her alone on the ranch for the first time since she arrived. As the morning light crawled across the kitchen floor, Rosalie pulled out the letters again, her letters. All the words she had poured out to Nathaniel, every line full of hope and fear and the desperate belief in a new beginning. But now holding them, something gnawed at her gut. Why would Nate keep every letter so carefully and yet not tell anyone he was leaving? Why disappear so cleanly without a trace? She didn't want to believe Calder's suspicions. She wanted to know. She rode into town just before noon, dust kicking up beneath the mare Calder had saddled for her days ago. The streets were livelier now, folks repairing storm damage, hauling debris, trading gossip. But when she walked up the steps to the sheriff's office, a hush seemed to fall on the street. Sheriff Merrick Cole stood with his back to her, writing something at his desk. He didn't look up when he said, "Miss Quinn, you've got the kind of spirit that doesn't sit quiet, don't you?" Rosalie didn't blink. "You knew Nate James, and you know what happened to him." Merrick capped his pen with slow precision, then turned. "I knew of him," he said smoothly. "A man like that stirs up dust he can't settle." "He was going to expose you," Rosalie said. Merrick chuckled. "That's a big accusation from a girl who just unpacked her bag." Rosalie stepped closer. "But it's not just me, is it? Calder suspects you too." That changed something. A shadow flickered across Merrick's face. "That boy's a fool. Always has been. He's the only one who's told me the truth," she snapped. Merrick stood slowly, resting his hands on the desk like a preacher preparing for judgment. "Truth? You want truth? Nate James wasn't a hero. He drank. He gambled. And when he got in too deep, he made enemies. Did he make one out of you?" Merrick's lip curled. "Watch yourself." Rosalie's voice didn't waver. "Or what? You'll make me disappear too?" They stared each other down. Rosalie's hands were trembling, but she didn't look away. Finally, Merrick spoke. "I warned Nate to leave well enough alone. He didn't, and I won't warn you twice." Rosalie backed out of the office, heart pounding, ears ringing. She didn't have proof, but now she had something almost as dangerous. A target on her back. Calder was already in the barn when she returned, hammering nails into a new support beam. When he saw her storm in, covered in dust and fire, he set the hammer down. "You went to him again," he said. Rosalie nodded. "He didn't deny it. Not really. He just made sure I knew I was next." Calder's jaw clenched. "Damn it, Rosie." She stepped forward, voice rising. "Don't you dare scold me like a child. I didn't come here to be quiet and afraid." "No," Calder said, stepping closer. "But you did come here to marry a man who's gone, and now you're standing in front of another man with a choice to make." Rosalie blinked. "What are you talking about?" Calder exhaled hard. "I didn't tell you the whole truth. Not all of it." She stiffened. "Say it." "I followed Nate's trail farther than I let on," he said, eyes shadowed. "I found his horse, saddle torn, blood on the rocks." Rosalie's voice cracked. "Why wouldn't you tell me that?" "Because if I did, you wouldn't have stayed, and I needed you to." She stared at him, something between grief and fury crashing through her. "You needed me?" Calder nodded slowly. "Not the way Nate did, not with promises. I needed you because you're not afraid to ask questions, because you made this place feel like it could be real again." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry." They stood in silence, the wind whispering through the cracks in the barn wall. Finally, Rosalie spoke. "Then help me finish what Nate started. Let's find out what Merrick is hiding." Calder looked at her, this woman who had arrived expecting love and found rot, and saw something stronger than anything he'd known. He nodded once. "We'll do it together." 3 nights later, under a slivered moon and the hush of late summer wind, Rosalie and Calder rode quietly into Dry Creek with one goal: expose what happened to Nathaniel James and bring down the man who'd buried the truth beneath dust and silence. They weren't armed with rifles, just a ledger, found tucked behind a false wall in Nate's old room, beneath a loose board Calder hadn't thought to check until Rosalie insisted. It held names, numbers, land deeds, and a scrawled map pointing straight to the sheriff's private claim. Land that never legally changed hands. Stolen land, and on the last page, one final note: "If I disappear, Merrick Cole knows why." Sheriff Cole was still at his desk when they arrived, boots on the floor this time, eyes sharp as if he'd been waiting. "You came back," he said. "We brought something," Rosalie answered, lifting the ledger. "From Nate." His jaw twitched. Calder stepped forward. "He was documenting every deal, every lie. You were fixing land disputes, pushing ranchers out, using your badge to scare the rest into silence." Cole didn't blink. "And what are you going to do with that little book? Read it to the church choir?" "No," Rosalie said. "We're giving it to Judge Carraway. He arrives tomorrow from Cheyenne." That got him. The sheriff stood, slow but taut like a trap resetting. "You won't leave this office with it." Calder didn't move. "Then you better kill us now." Cole reached for his drawer, but before his fingers found the handle, the door behind them creaked open. 2 men from the town stood there, one holding a shotgun, the other a lantern. "We heard enough," said the older man. "About time someone took the law back." Sheriff Merrick froze. His silence said everything. By noon the next day, Cole was shackled to the back of a marshal's wagon. The town watched, silent but wide-eyed. Some nodded. A few spat. One boy threw a stone. Calder stood with Rosalie near the general store steps, hand lightly on the small of her back. She hadn't said much since dawn. "Still think you're leaving?" he asked. She looked up at him, eyes pale and tired, but clear. "I thought about it, about packing my things, heading somewhere new. But there's something about this place." He waited. Rosalie smiled faintly. "It doesn't give you anything easy, but it gives you the chance to build something, if you fight for it." Calder gave a quiet laugh. "You really are nothing like I expected." "Good," she said, turning toward him fully. "Because I didn't come here for someone else's idea of a wife. And I don't need saving." "I know," Calder said, voice low. "I think maybe I need you more than you ever needed me." For a long moment, neither of them looked away. The crowd dispersed behind them, but they stayed rooted, as if the dust and wind had finally given them permission to stand still. That evening, back at the ranch, Rosalie sat on the porch swing Nate had built but never hung. Calder had fixed it to the beams that morning. The sun fell slow across the plains, bleeding orange, and rose into the sky. "Tell me," Calder said, sitting beside her, "if things had gone the way they were meant to, if Nate had been here to meet you, what do you think would have happened?" Rosalie leaned back, letting the swing creak gently beneath them. "He would have smiled, offered me flowers, told me all the things he thought I wanted to hear. And," she turned her head, "and I would have found out who he really was eventually. Maybe too late." Calder exhaled. "He wrote you those letters, but I was the one who read between the lines." Rosalie reached for his hand. "I didn't write to you, Calder, but somehow you're the one who answered." The wind blew soft across the grass. Somewhere in the barn, the horses shifted gently. They sat like that until the stars came out, quiet and steady. Not perfect, but real. What would you have done if you were in Rosalie's shoes? Would you have stayed and fought, or left to find a new beginning elsewhere? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think about Rosalie and Calder's journey.